Welcome to the 11th hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte. This is the final chapter of our week-long look at crime and punishment. Most of the people we've spoken with, Governor Cuomo, Rudolph Giuliani, Brooklyn DA Liz Holtzman, and some scared citizens with guns, seem to feel that unless sure punishment catches up with rising crime, the streets will not be safe. Now, we're going to talk to some people who create violence on paper and on film. The good guys usually win, but not until some people, usually women, die in a routinely gory way. Is their work a social safety valve, or is it a stimulant for more violence? Before we meet our lineup of celebrated suspects, let's go to the movies.
And you knew you needed another protector, somebody to fill Thursby's boots.
In the early days of the hard-boiled detective story, the private Dick was shady but moral. In the final scene of The Maltese Falcon, Sam Spade turned in his girlfriend for the murder of his partner, Miles Archer.
Well, if you get a good break, you'll be out at the Tehachapi in 20 years, and you can come back to me then. I hope they don't hang you, Precious, for that sweet neck.
I know what you're thinking.
By the 1970s, when Dirty Harry was the top cop of the silver screen, policemen were exhibiting the kind of gratuitous violence once reserved for criminals.
But Ian, this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Hey, I got to know.
Do you have any idea how hard it is to prosecute a cop?
In this clip from Magnum Force, Dirty Harry is dealing with a new kind of criminal, cops turned vigilante.
You heroes have killed a dozen people this week. What are you going to do next week?
Kill a dozen more?
Is that what you guys are all about? Being heroes?
All our heroes are dead. We're the first generation that's learned to fight. We're simply ridding society of killers that would be caught and sentenced anyway if our courts worked properly.
Miami Vice chronicles the life of the modern-day fantasy cop, neurotic samurai out to purge society of drug kingpins by any means necessary. Joining me now is William J. Caunitz, a 30-year veteran of the New York police force who retired to a life of crime, writing. One Police Plaza and Suspects were bestsellers. His latest is Black Sand. And Dr. Robert J. Lifton, professor, author, psychiatrist, a world-renowned expert on the impact of violence. Welcome. Bill, let me start with you. The way we've seen the code of the cop movie, for example, change from Sam Spade, who was a moral man, to Make My Day and beyond, in which the cop is not that different from the criminal.
Well, you have to remember that films are made for young people today, especially the violent films. They're the ones, the young people are the ones who go and pay the $6 or $7 to go see those films. Also, they reflect our society.
That's scarier.
Well, I understand that, but that's the reality of
well, I mean, the people who perpetrated Wilding were young people who go to Dirty Harry movies.
That's right, that's right. But my judgment is that the basic problem here in this country with violence is you have a huge underclass that's not being addressed. You have to get rid of your underclass by education and by a federal Marshall Plan if you really want to get rid of the violence. It's hard to go into a ghetto and tell a young man who cannot read or write, who has no educational skills, no employable skills, who has never had a job, not to deal drugs, where he can make himself a fortune in a few months.
Well, these are important long-term goals, but in the short term, there's police and there's also the impact of the media. What do you think, Dr. Lifton? I mean, do you think that there is a negative impact in these kind of movies and television of violence?
There can be, but the media aren't the problem. In that sense, I agree with what's just been said. The problem is the violence in the society, and the media reflect that. You're going to have violence on the media, and you need violence on the media. I'll go that far. Except I think it has a much better influence if the violence is of some quality, some artistic quality, that conveys a message and has a moral voice of the author.
Could you be specific? Tell me about the aesthetic
for instance,
value of violence.
Crime and Punishment is a violent novel, very violent. It's got a murder that's depicted, and it's a grotesque murder. But it's a novel, as its title suggests, of crime and punishment that's spiritual and psychological, as well as the actual events.
Well, this might sound very elite, and probably is, but I suspect that the underclass that Bill is talking about, or the people who perpetrate most of the violence in this society, other than insider traders, will never read Crime and Punishment.
They don't have to read Crime and Punishment, but as a matter of fact, the underclass is underestimated. There can be a lot of bright people in the underclass who are there because of various social and racial forces in the society. And they don't have to have Crime and Punishment, but they can have decent shows that have some quality, some nuance, something that you learn about human nature, as opposed to exploitation and a simple reveling in grotesqueness and blood and pain.
Now, you've seen, through your 30 years in the police department, you've seen also the quality of criminal change, haven't you?
Yes. Was never when I became a policeman, you never saw the violence that you had today. Occasionally, you would have a homicide, a cop would get killed, but you never had policemen assassinated. Never. Today, you're dealing with a great drug culture. You have a proliferation of all sorts of violent weapons, and it reflects in our society. And crime writers reflect society. We don't make it up. We mirror society.
Well, I mean, in one of your books, maybe it was One Police Plaza, a woman died from, I guess, the toxic shock of having a curtain rod thrust up her vagina. It was very violent.
That was a homicide I worked on. I didn't make that up. That was a homicide I caught on Alabama Avenue. I was a detective in a 7-5 squad. It happened. And I wrote about it. I fictionalized it.
And probably made it even more vivid than the real thing.
Well, I don't know. It was vivid enough. I still remember it. You see something like that, you're not liable to forget it. But violence is in our society. We're a very, very violent society. It's not new.
Dr. Lifton, reading or seeing in a film, however aesthetic, an incident such as Bill wrote about and saw, do you think that has any impact on the viewer-reader?
It has an impact, but I think the impact can vary depending upon how it's handled as an incident. You can show very grotesque things in film or television or write about them in books. If there's some kind of message in that the author has a view, he's showing you this to get you to the other side, you look into the abyss in order to see beyond it. That's the principle. But lots of authors and lots of TV writers keep you in the abyss because it's fascinating. And that, I think, can have a negative effect.
Well, for example, Death Wish. Charles Bronson being given license to go off and off the population of New York because of the rape and murder of his wife and daughter. Do you think that there's anything positive? Do you think there's a message in that?
Well, you know, I would take, I don't know so much about Death Wish. I would think more about the Rambo films. I think there's a real message in that's dangerous, because that's a kind of rewriting of the Vietnam War, among other things, and a glorification of direct, immediate, simple violence, often against people of a different color, as a heroic macho expression. Incidentally, the very set of things that Vietnam veterans I worked with were trying to extricate themselves from.
Bill, Death Wish, that kind of thing. I think Dr. Lifton is making the point that even beyond aesthetics of violence, if there is a purpose or a message to the violence, its impact will be different than if it's just senseless.
Sure, because
Do you think that is...
You have producers make films to make money. And if they have a formula that's going to make money, they don't really much care about what impact it has, as long as those tickets are sold at the box office. Rambo makes a fortune, and it will continue to make a fortune, I think, because they make it for the young people. Young people, as I said before, they're the theater goers today.
And they're, again, the people who are most likely
That's correct.
to go out
They're
and
the violent
perpetrate
ones in our
violence.
society.
Well, Dr. Lipton, we don't have very much time. Do you think there's any possibility that that kind of violence, that kind of fantasy violence, removes people from the real pain and gore and suffering of
Absolutely.
violence?
When I worked with anti-war veterans, they had their phrase, what they called the John Wayne thing. And that really meant naked, direct violence without any real pain to the people who perpetrated or any consequences. And it had to do with macho and a certain male bravado and toughness, and it had been enormously attractive to them. And no consequences. They experienced consequences in Vietnam, and they felt deeply betrayed by what the culture had taught them. So sure, there is a lesson.
We're almost out of time. Do you think that as there is a connection between the John Wayne thing and being almost sucked into Vietnam, that there is any connection between similar John Wayne things and perpetrating violence on a woman jogger, on other kids in a housing project?
Well, the violence you're talking about is not caused by the media, but the media can facilitate it. By and large, the violence is a social problem. It has to do with social breakdown, and it's a human potential. But the media can ease it along, and even though, you use on the media what will sell, the people are capable of responding, I mean the ordinary viewers and the so-called underclass and everybody else, responding to better fare, to fare that has some moral content, and I think we ought to work toward getting it.
Okay. Dr. Lifton, Bill Caunitz, thank you so very much for being with us. We'll be right back with 3 leading crime novelists, but first, 2 movie clips from their work. In Donald Westlake's The Stepfather, real estate salesman Jerry Blake is murderously disappointed by a string of families who just don't fit his ideal.
Where have you been?
Showing the Morton house to some folks from California.
Don't lie to me, Jerry.
What?
I called your office today.
I didn't get a message.
Of course you didn't get a message. They said you stopped working there several days ago.
What?
The receptionist said that you left.
That idiot. That new girl can't... Susan, I never got anyone fired in my life, but that girl, I don't know.
You mean you still work there?
Of course. Where else would I be?
I don't know. I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry.
This is very upsetting. Old man Grace is still there.
No, forget it, honey. Forget it. She probably just got the name wrong or something.
Hodgkins, what's to get wrong?
What did you say?
Huh? Wait a minute. Who am I here?
Jerry.
Jerry. Jerry Blake. Thank you, honey. You all right, sweetheart?
I'd like a case of Dom Perignon.
Buzz, written by Ed McBain, is based on his 87th Precinct series. In this scene, an undercover police stakeout is accidentally thwarted by both other cops and a crook in search of champagne.
Who the hell is that? It's the police, goddammit! What police? We're the police! Is this your idea of a joke, Corella? Oh, God.
Joining me now, Donald Westlake, author of dozens of crime novels under a number of aliases. His most recent book is Sacred Monster. Sue Grafton, her most recent is F is for Fugitive. She's the creator of Kinsey, Milhone, A Private Puss. And Evan Hunter, appearing here as Ed McBain, author of the 87th Precinct series. Welcome. Donald, let me start with you and ask a kind of a hostile question. We saw that film clip in The Stepfather where he really whacked that lady in a kind of a tough and gory way with the telephone. What are we to make of that in terms of violence, teaching violence, becoming passive to violence?
Well, seeing it as about 11 seconds of film clip, I'm not sure what you could make of it. Seeing
it gets worse. I mean, I watched the whole thing,
well,
and
seeing
he
it
really
in
does a job on her.
In the context of 90 minutes, it becomes a film about something, and it becomes a film, seriously, about the dangers of perfection, the dangers of idealism. That's his problem, is he can't stand imperfection. Whenever he's starting to go over the edge, he says, we need a little order around here. We have to have some
you're
order.
framing that in what Dr. Lifton recently talked about as long as it has a message and it's in some aesthetic way, it's okay.
As long as it reflects reality, and there are such people in the world. Ted Bundy was a heck of a lot more violent than the movies could possibly show, as a matter of fact. So we try to make him, I did, the director did, the actor did, we tried to make him both real and unreachable.
And that the violence stood for something.
Yes.
Evan, all the cops or bad guys getting shot in Fuzz. Which again...
That was a humorous scene, by the way.
Yeah, that was, we all laughed.
Yeah.
Now, that again was pulled out of context, and of course, you know, the 87th Precinct novels, of which I have read a bag full, certainly put these in a greater frame. And yet, what does that mean? I mean, people getting shot and killed. Is that amusing? Do you think it's cathartic? Do you think it matters?
Well, the intent of that scene was to get laughter, but and you notice nobody got shot. A lot of guns were going off, but nobody got shot.
The guy with the sergeant's uniform went down as if he
was a bad guy. He was an imposter playing it. You know, if you had seen the rest of the film, you know he's one of the bad guys playing, impersonating a cop.
I understand, but he did get shot.
Yeah, he did get shot. But you see, I feel that the writer has a responsibility when he's depicting violence. And you have to remember, there's a vast difference between writing for the screen and writing a book. Writing a book and the reading of a book is a very personal matter. It's one of the few one-on-one experiences left in communication. When we go to a movie theater, there are hundreds and thousands of people sometimes sitting around you. When you're reading a book, you're alone with the book and presumably with the author. But the writer's responsibility, whether he's writing for the screen or for a book, is to show the violence for what it is, and then to make a comment about it, a moral statement about it. So I think the reader looks to us for attitudes that are correct. It doesn't look to us only for a puzzle that must be solved, but he wants our heroes to have attitudes that are correct.
So you would make a judgment, writer by writer, not so much on the violence, but on the politics, the ideology, the social concern.
Absolutely, I have. You know, and when we're talking about Donald, the man hitting her with the telephone, these things happen all the time. And every killer and every person who commits any sort of a crime has a justification for it, a real reason for doing it that sounds absolutely sensible when he explains it. I had to do this. He has somehow reached the point of committing murder and of seeing it as a viable solution to something, which is dangerous.
Sue Grafton wants to jump into this, but hold your thought, because I wanted to ask you something about your heroine, Kinsey Milhone, a female detective. We can't call her a private dick.
Thank you.
In a sense, she is something of an antidote, and let's be hostile to these guys, to all the female victims through all of the other crime novels that we read.
But I think the three of us are all doing the same thing, which is commenting on a phenomenon in society, and I don't think we create it any more than a medical journal creates disease. You know, we observe and we reflect and we record. So I think whether it's a female perspective or theirs, we are basically looking at the same set of facts.
I think that's a cute analogy with the medical journal. I reject it out of hand because it's quite different, because one of the things that, you know, it's conceivable that not you're doing, but some are doing, and maybe in your Parker, Richard Stark's Parker novels you did, is creating a kind of a passivity and acceptance of violence, even if you're framing it, even if you're giving it some sort of moral sense to it. You're saying, yeah, it happens. What do you think, Donald?
Well, all right, you referred to the Parker series, and that was a series of books about what I think of as a workman. The job he did was steal, but he thought of himself as a professional, and he thought of the people who worked with him as professionals. And I go back to Dashiell Hammett and the Continental Op, and the Continental Op at one point said, emotions are nuisances in business hours. And Parker was never involved in violence for its own sake. He found it wasteful of energy. Those are clock, watching the machinery inside a glass clock is what those books were. And they were really quite non-violent in comparison with a lot of
on the
other
contrary,
books.
I remember some wonderfully violent scenes in the
They stood out because
they really did, and I'll tell you about them later on. But then we see these crime novels as morality plays, as framing violence, as commentaries on our time, and again to repeat my elitist statement to Dr. Lifton, just as those boys who were accused of wilding in the park probably didn't read Crime and Punishment, while they may have seen film and movie versions of your work, they may not have probably read your work. So what can you do for us? I mean, how are you helping us make sense of what's going on around us? Sue?
I think in part we show a world in which order is restored, and I think it is a comfort, however false it may be. I like to think of us as the magicians of literature, because we try to provide a good story with beginning, middle, and end, and some sense of balance restored.
Okay, so there's hope.
Yeah.
Certainly you offer that. You certainly offer order, because even when things go bad in the 87th precinct, it's not systemic. It's a problem that has to be solved. But the violence that you offer is, I mean, we get off on it. Is that bad?
I don't know. I'm sure neither Donald nor Sue use violence just gratuitously. You know, we don't come along and say, let's do a violent
Neither do
scene
you,
now,
but
let's do a sex scene.
But women
whatever.
hang from lampposts or something
That's true,
like that.
they do.
Hey.
Yeah, but very good reason for it.
Oh?
In the book, I mean, if I'm putting myself in the murderer's shoes and inside his head, he has a very good reason for hanging these women from lampposts. It's not just that it is a stark and frightening visual image, a woman hanging from a lamppost on a city street. But he has a very good reason for doing it and for making it that visual and that attention-getting. So, you know, it's interesting what the reader brings to a scene. You know, you can have a scene where people will say to me, oh, that scene where he's slashing her to ribbons. And you say, what scene? And you look in the book, and it says, it ends with, he picked up the knife. And that's the end of the scene, and the reader is supplying all the violence.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. Donald, do you think that you guys provide us a service?
Yes.
And
the service is that life is full of quite justified panic. Panic is the belief that something irreversible is going to happen. And we write stories in which the panic is presented and then put away, and the irreversible doesn't quite happen this time.
Thank goodness. Donald Westlake, Evan Hunter, Sue Grafton, thank you very much for sharing with us. If we've come to any conclusion in our week on crime and punishment, it's this. There is a community of concern that connects powerful politicians, such as the governor of New York, to the poor and the weak, who are routinely the victims of violence. And right now, while the city is still looking at itself with freshly horrified eyes, that community can act. Inner city neighborhoods can regain control of their streets and their children with the support of government through the criminal justice, educational, and healthcare systems. Many of our guests this week said, it's now or never. This is the 11th hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte. This is Robert Lipsyte. Join me next time on the 11th Hour. I'll be talking with Alice Walker, author of The Color Purple, and listening to the Shoreham Nuclear Blues. I'll visit Times Square and then take a trip on the New Jersey Turnpike. Meet me at my exit.